I'm going to sew up one of the raglan seams now. This is where I'm at. I have finished sewing the seam from here on up to the neck, and what I'm using is one of the tails from where I switched colors down here at the base of the yoke. This is a yarn that has 25% nylon content in it, if I remember correctly. It's acrylic nylon, and it is quite springy and tends to have a mind of its own. So sometimes that's good, and I like it for children's clothing in particular because it's very hard wearing. But it can be a little bit problematic, and one of the things it tends to do, let's just go back to where I was. This would have been the first row that I knitted, and as I knitted downwards, this opened itself up quite a little bit. It has on the other side too, and I have already pulled that one to tighten it. So what I'm going to do now is sew, and if that stitch opens up again, well, this one shouldn't because I'm going to use the tail from it. But if it does, when I get ready to work the ends in on the inside, then I can just give things a good sharp tug and it'll pull it back up again. Okay. I'm actually just going under one bar at this point, and as you can see, what I've done is put my needle in through the center of the mint yarn, because that's the base of that is actually where the first row of dark green is, down at the V, the bottom of that stitch. And then when I come back to this side, this is a little bit more of a challenge on this side. But again, I want to get the first stitch right at the bottom of the V. So we'll tighten that tail up just a little bit. Now I'm going to work one bar at a time. Once you get it started, it's a little bit easier. It's that first row or two getting this going. I'm just picking up one bar at a time. I can make a neater seam on these shorter areas, and particularly on the raglans. I'm going to tighten that a little bit right now. When I'm sewing up the back and the sleeves, except when I'm going through the Fairisle sections. On those I also work one bar at a time, but on the stockinette I tend to go under 2 bars. Now that's just a personal preference. This is about as heavy a yarn as I would want to do that. On thinner yarn I almost always go under 2 bars at a time when I'm seaming. When the yarn gets thicker, though, I feel that the seam is a little stronger if you take just 1 bar. But again, that's your choice. Now I'm almost down to the underarm, and when we get there I want to show you a little bit of something different. It actually isn't truly mattress stitch when I get to the base of it. It is sort of, and this will transition seamlessly into it. At least it should. Okay. Actually, I went 1 row too far. Let me take that out. I've already sewn up the other side of that raglan. That's why this hole is so small. Okay. What I'm going to do now, instead of continuing to try to do mattress stitch through there, or at least mattress stitch as I've begun it, what I'm going to do at this point is put the needle in this hole, and then actually I'm going around this whole stitch, and I'm not going into the very outer that outside bar. That would make a pretty weak seam, and it will make a pretty good sized hole. So I'm up 2 bars from the edge, and I've put the needle behind the whole stitch, behind both legs of that stitch. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Again, 2 bars from the edge, and I've put the needle behind the entire stitch, behind both legs of that stitch. Again, behind both legs of that stitch. And both legs of that stitch. Now we've reached the seam, and I'm going to just see if I can open that a little bit and poke these yarns through to the inside. Would have probably been better to do that before we got clear to the seam line. Not going to do anything special with them, they're just going to get worked in and clipped off. Okay, this is where we began seaming, right here. This is all mattress stitch, and then down here, this is that modified stitch. Now, we do have sort of a hole, and that's because we have a seam here, we have a seam here, we have a seam here, and we have a seam here, and we need to get this closed up a little bit. So when you reach this point, it's sort of use your own judgment as to what needs to be sewn into. The object is to close the hole, to close it neatly. All those other seams are already done, so nothing's going to come apart, and it's not that I'm trying to prevent something from raveling or coming loose. I'm just trying to make this as neat as I possibly can. And I think we've just about got it. Okay, so that's what it looks like at this point. I'm going to just pass the needle to the inside. Now this is where I would normally just flip the sweater wrong side out and work the ends in, but I want to show you what the thing looks like before we go any farther. I can't zoom out enough to show you the entire sweater, so let's just look at it in pieces, and then I'll put it on a mannequin. Okay, we have a seam here. We have a seam here. Turn it over. We have a seam here. And we have a seam here. Now, get back down where we can see things a little better. I want to point out one more thing. Each one of these little jogs is where the short rows came. And you'll find that all the way around the sweater because I have short rowed back, front, and both sleeves. When I noticed what was happening, my first thought was to take it out and eliminate those jogs. Then I thought, no, that illustrates quite well where the short row shaping is. Normally, I would try not to have those show. They don't bother me much, but it does some people. So, one thing you can do to minimize the little jogs, when you change color from a solid color to a solid color, is knit. I would say in this yarn, I should have probably knitted all the way across and all the way back, and then started the short rows. That would put the little jogs down here, and they would be the same color. They would be the dark green, and they wouldn't show, or they wouldn't show very much. Because they are right where the colors change, they are more noticeable. Okay, let's take a look at the bottom. This is basically the same pattern that we had in the yoke, but I did not put a row of solid mint, and so it changed the effect a little bit. I'm not certain I like it. It isn't bad, but it was an experiment, and I think I would have liked it better if I had put the mint, one row of mint, top and bottom. What I really wanted to show you, though, is the side seam. I did not allow for this to be matched precisely, and it isn't, but it mirrors itself pretty well, so it doesn't look bad. You're going to find this happens quite a bit. If you have tried to make the yoke match, then sometimes it's a little harder to make the bottom match. It can be done. It certainly can be done. We could have decreased as we came down, or increased for the hips, whatever, to take care of that little difference. Sleeves, though, can be a bit more of a challenge. Okay, it hasn't been blocked, so it's kind of wanting to pull in. In this case, it isn't going to match, and there's no way that I could have unless I made the sleeve all the way wider and then gathered it onto a cuff. And this is the finished sweater shown on my mannequin. Now, as you can see, there is no fold across the front. There's no pouch at the underarm. There's a little fold on the sleeve because the mannequin's arms are pretty skinny. On a human, there wouldn't be that much of a fold. I'm going to move the camera just slightly. There is no shelf across the front. Again, I'm going to move the camera. There is a very nice curve all around the front, and the front neck sits low enough that it's not going to choke you. All in all, I think you're going to be quite pleased with the shape of this.